Let's now bring in Father Gregory Gaston, Rector of the Pontificio Collegio Filippino in Rome. Father Gaston, can you hear us okay? Welcome to
Hello po, good
Storycon.
afternoon to all of you.
Magandang hapon, Father. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Father. I want to take off first, Father, from your last interview with us, wherein you gave some details of the viewing, which will start the morning of April 23. I'm wondering if there's been any updates on that. Ano pa po yung alam natin at this point of how the day will take shape?
Okay, so as of now, we're still expecting, no, probably within a few hours or maybe minutes even, since it's still morning here in Rome. It's 9 o'clock, 9:11 in the morning, so we're still waiting for the Vatican updates, and they would surely be indicating to us the procedures, logistics regarding the wake and regarding the burial itself, because many people will be coming, not only pilgrims, but also heads of states and the leaders of the different religious communities, whether Catholics or non-Catholics, will be paying homage to our dear Pope Francis. So we're still waiting for the updates.
But Father, we also understand that the Pope had left some instructions on how he would want the ceremony to be held. But before you go there, could you give us first an idea of how it has always been traditionally? Whenever a Pope dies, I understand there are certain traditions that are done in the way, for example, the viewing is done or the wake is done, and so on down the line. Could you begin with that first? How was it traditionally? I understand there were 3 coffins, I think.
Yeah. Yes, I think I'm so happy and blessed to have been here during when Pope John Paul II died, and also Pope Benedict when he resigned, and when he died, I was here assigned at the Vatican, and then later here at Collegio Filippino. So there's a lot of tradition. I think it was Pope John Paul II who sort of made the latest updates, to the tradition, indicating the way the coffins, for example, I think 3 coffins, one inside the other, wood and then tin and then some other metal. And then in the case of Pope John Paul II, he was buried in the grottos, we call it the underground, the original level of St. Peter's Basilica of the 4th century, 5th century level. He was there, but then many people were coming to visit him, so he was brought up to the current place where he is now, right beside the chapel of the Pietà. Upon entry to the basilica, to the right, the first chapel is the Pietà, and the second chapel is the tomb of Pope John Paul II. And then Pope Benedict, when he died, he was placed there in that place, vacated, tomb vacated by Pope John Paul II. So the ceremonies, they started actually yesterday, after the Pope died in the morning, 7:35, but he was officially declared or ascertained to be dead at 8 o'clock in the evening. So the doctors were there, and also some of the cardinals, Cardinal Farrell as the Camerlengo, and then also some other staff. And I think last night he was already placed in a coffin.
And this coffin is a single coffin made of wood and zinc as per his last will. And he also decided, Pope Francis also decided that he will not be buried in the St. Peter's Basilica as per tradition, but rather at the Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, which is close to his favorite Madonna icon where he often went to pray. Pag ganitong may mga last will and last wishes, Father, does the church adhere to all of it, or meron parang you have to mix it a little bit with tradition, or do they abide by every single last wish?
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, Pope John Paul II laid down specifics and instructions regarding the death of the Pope. And of course, I think that would serve as a guideline in case the Pope doesn't indicate otherwise or doesn't indicate any other additions or difference. But in this case, Pope Francis willed that he wanted that. So, and then the testament has been published. It's in the Vatican website and, of course, circulating already, I suppose. So in the testament, he indicated the kind of coffin and that he would be there at Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary Major, because even he has been manifesting his devotion to Our Lady even the day after he was elected. when he was elected, he announced that he would be going on a pilgrimage to a Marian shrine, and that was the following day. He suddenly appeared at St. Mary Major's without any publicity. He was just there in a normal car, as you also mentioned, instead of a high-end vehicle for heads of states. And he wanted to have a mid-sized car, normal car here in Italy, the Fiat car. So, and then he was there, and then he even went back to the residence where he had stayed earlier, where he used to stay whenever he would come to Rome. He was there just before the conclave, and he went back after St. Mary Major the following day after his election to pay his bills, not to pay his bills, because he thought that he would be coming back after the elections, but then he ended up inside the Vatican after the elections. No? So he wants to be buried there in St. Mary Major's. That was his first pilgrimage as a pope, and then, well, symbolically also his last pilgrimage, now that his body will be brought from St. Peter's to St. Mary Major.
So, Father, there is no hard and fast rule as far as these matters are concerned. I mean, do you mean that the Pope has the prerogative to change the rules as he wants as you go along?
Yeah. Yes. So technically, because even in the Code of Canon Law, that would be like the laws of the Church, the Pope can make any decision. He is the Supreme Pontiff, and he can make any decision, and nobody could even go against him, whatever he wants. But of course, since he is no longer Pope, he is dead. Technically, the next Pope could change. If, for example, he says that, the Pope deserves a high place of honor, then we put him somewhere else, more accessible to the people, more visible, etc. Then the next Pope could do that. But I'm sure he would respect Pope Francis's desire.
Pwede mo overrule the last will? Pwede mo overrule ng next Pope? I mean, technically.
I suppose so. Kasi naman siya kasi kumbaga, to give him maybe a little more honor or whatever, or ewan ko, baka later on kung mag-decide, For example, in the case of John Paul II, doon siya dati, he was in a tomb downstairs in the basement, but then many people would come to him, so the crowd could not be accommodated, so he was brought up. So we'll never know. For example, if many people would start invading St. Mary Major, and then the building could no longer contain the crowd, then maybe he could also be transferred, depending naman.
But I guess for now they're going to try to
to the wishes.
To be faithful to the wishes of Pope Francis. Father, I also noticed that in your previous interview with us, you said during the sede vacante, which is right now, which is that the vacant seat, the seat has been declared vacant, all the cardinals are considered resigned. Is that correct? Could you expound on that, please?
Yes, that's true. No? There's also an indication that whenever the Pope resigns or dies, the cardinals, the heads of the Vatican offices, so not all the cardinals. So, for example, Cardinal Advincula, Cardinal Amo David, they're in Manila, Caloocan, they continue to be the cardinals, the bishops of their own places. But the ones appointed by the Pope here are considered resigned. So all the heads of for example, mission territories, so Cardinal Tagle, or the cardinal in charge of the religious, of the priests, of the families and lay people, all these cardinals are considered resigned, but they all have their secretaries, the second in command within their office, so their offices continue their day-to-day operations, their day-to-day commitments and missions.
So they resign their offices, but not their positions as cardinals.
Yes, so they maintain their title as cardinals, but they no longer go to the office, for example.
Parang courtesy resignation for example,
in government, in government.
Exactly, parang coterminous with the Pope.
I was just going to ask about Cardinal Taglinga because he was appointed
the dicastery of
the evangelization, the congregation, the head of the congregation for evangelization of the people. So at this point in time, he's considered resigned from that office. Pero cardinal pa rin siya. Okay.
Father, balikan ko lang something you mentioned a while ago, some details that you mentioned a while ago, like the Pope being so simple. He would ride the bus along with the other cardinals instead of riding his own SUV. He would stay in I suppose you might call it a hotel of sorts for the cardinals
Resident.
whenever they have to visit or whether they have, whenever there's a conclave. So that's something that marked this particular Pope, his simplicity, his being like one of us. But I'm also wondering how that came across to some of the other officials of the church. I mean, to us regular people, it's a very heartening thing to hear something like that. But I'm wondering how it comes across to other people who are more traditional, who are more traditionalists, who may want to have some sort of a separation of sorts between, because of course it is a hierarchical institution. And there are some people who would want, there are some officials who may want to maintain that hierarchy of sorts. So I'm wondering how that came across to other officials in the church.
Yeah, well, of course, each one would have his own mind, would have his own exposure and then preferences as well. No? So, for example, maybe a certain distance would also be
There, that's the word.
necessary. No? For example, Pope Francis, he stays there at the house. It's called Casa Santa Marta, and that is where the cardinal electors would be staying. So the residents there throughout the year, normally they are the priests who are assigned to the Secretary of State or to the different offices in the Vatican, about 100, I don't know exactly, maybe 180, maybe 200, the capacity. No? And it was built by Pope John Paul II because earlier, what the cardinals would do is they would be housed in the old buildings of the, I think, near the Vatican museums. It's connected to the Vatican Library, Vatican Archives. So imagine the cardinals camping, literally, almost. They would put beds and then makeshift toilets along the big corridors of the museum, of the library. So they would set up like tents or divisions, all temporary, just to house the 120 voting cardinals and the other cardinals prior to the votation itself in that kind of situation. So Pope John Paul II, I think he was able to find a benefactor who built that residence, current residence. So as of now, the monsignors, the priests assigned to the Vatican and who stay at Casa Santa Marta, they have to evacuate. As of now, I think they're now moving their things, finding temporary housing for maybe a month or a few weeks. And that way, that would allow the cardinals to enter and to be there during the conclave. So Pope Francis chose to be in that house, in that residence, instead of what we call the papal apartments. Although technically, when we say apartment, well, our Filipino OFWs, they live in apartments. The usual people, they live in apartments. The papal apartments were only actually a room, a bedroom for the Pope, not that big, and then a studio where he would write his documents, and then followed by a chapel, and then a library. So that would be the papal apartment. Is that really that grandiose?
Yeah, we saw videos of the Camerlengo, the Cardinal Kevin Farrell, sealing the doors of the apartment of Pope Francis with a red ribbon. What's the significance of that, Father?
Okay, so it's a tradition also, to make sure that the things inside remain as they are, because of course, for the sake of history, for the sake of the archives, they would like to preserve the room as it was left by the Pope. And that way, maybe later on, they would be able to maybe catalog, of course, they have started that already, but just in case, they need to study a little more exactly what the Pope had there, and maybe some other documents that he has left, etc. So it's more for the, I would say, filing purposes, and also it's part of the tradition to seal the room with wax. I think normally it's a wax seal, to hold the ribbon as well.
Sealed talaga siya.
But it's only temporary, Father, so there will be an inventory of sorts, after which I suppose they will have to clear the room.
Yes. And then after that, when everything is cleared, there is a new Pope, etc., then I'm sure that room will be back to normal. I don't know if the new Pope will be staying there or if he would prefer to go back to the papal apartments, the papal rooms, then that would be also an option.
Father, we're joined by the editor-in-chief of the Philippine Star
Let's just-
on Zoom. Si Ami Pamintuan also joins us right now. Ami,
Let's just bring her
are
in.
you there?
Hello po, Ami.
Ami, nakamute ka ata. I think you're muted.
Okay, let's. Well, Ami will try to jump in when she can. But Father, let's talk about the conclave now, since you've mentioned the new pope. So at this point in time, we know that the new pope will be chosen by the College of Cardinals, which is the most senior leadership of the Catholic Church. We know at this point that there are more than 250 cardinals from over 90 countries, pero ang eligible lang to vote would be at least 135. And at least 108 of those were appointed by Pope Francis in the last 10 years, in keeping with his approach to make a more inclusive church. Talk us through when you expect this to kick off, because we know it's 15 to 20 days after the period of mourning. Is that correct?
That's correct. No, 15 to 20 days. I think we will get a glimpse of the logistics and the timeframes this morning, hopefully, when the Vatican document would come out. But it's 15 to 21 days, a period of mourning, period of logistics, because they also have to fix the Casa Santa Marta. Imagine they would have to seal literally all the windows so they cannot be opened, and the cardinals could not communicate with the outside world. And then I was here when Pope John Paul II died, and I was assigned at the Vatican, so I also accompanied the Cardinal, who was an elector at the time, the head of our office, Cardinal Lopez Trujillo, who also visited Manila once for the World Meeting of Families. Anyway, the Cardinals would enter through the normal entrance, the lobby. However, their luggages were sent to the garage entry, and there they were screened, the luggages, and the cardinals themselves, they entered through a metal detector in the main lobby to make sure that there are no means of communications, no laptops, no cell phones. Why? So that they could focus. They could focus the discussions among themselves and not have outside communication. So all this logistics, that 15 to 21 days, and then that would be when, after which the cardinals will be summoned to Rome, meaning they'll start to come officially after about the 1 or 2 weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks. And the first thing that they will be doing is a week of retreat, of prayer, reflection, getting to know each other. As you said, Pope Francis appointed cardinals from all over the world, even the tiniest countries, Brunei, Papua New Guinea, in terms of Catholic population, because Pope Francis wanted to hear also not only from majority Catholic countries, big Catholic countries, but from all over the world, because the Church serves not only Catholics, but everybody to the extent possible. So 1 week of this prayer reflection, after which, by the way, in this first week, all the cardinals are invited, so whoever of the 250 could come may join the discussions, also to get a feel of what kind of new pope, the Church and the world needs today. And after that would be the election proper, normally on a Monday afternoon, one election, and then Tuesdays onwards, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, but only the 135 voting cardinals, meaning below 80 years old.
Let's bring in Ami. I think Ami's audio is now fixed. Ami?
Father.
There you
Hi,
are.
Father. Good afternoon. Condolence
Hello po, Ami. Good
po sa
afternoon.
inyo at sa ating lahat. You talk about what kind of pope we will be seeing in the coming weeks. Ano yan ang speculation ngayon eh. Tutuloy kaya yung reformist path na kinuha ni Pope Francis o babalik tayo sa traditional kasi malaking pushback, no? Everybody's asking about it. I know you don't have a crystal ball, pero kayo, anong sense nyo? Within the church, insider kayo dyan. Ano kaya ang more likely mangyayari?
Oh, thank you so much, Ami. I would say that all the popes, they have a single mission to carry out Jesus's commandment of love, loving God above all things and loving our neighbors as ourselves, expressed in the different historical contexts So for example, in the early centuries, no, wala pa naman Catholic countries, no, wala pa naman mga missionaries, so they had a different way of life. Or maybe more recently, First World War, Second World War, wala pa naman mga technology noon, wala pa itong mga social media, wala pa. So iba yung mga situation. And then Pope Francis, no, he's so blessed. And we are so blessed because he was able to use social media with all his advisors at the same time, sending out the messages. And also even in the lately, no, in the past few years, even going into artificial intelligence, I think the Vatican is one of the most well studied the document regarding human intelligence, artificial intelligence, when it comes to the dignity of the human person, respecting life, respecting the human nature, and so on. So Pope Francis has been progressive in this way, maybe in the same way as the other popes were progressive during their times. No? Although laid back pa nga yung progress doon, iba naman. So for example, Pope, I think Pius the 11th, no, he was very progressive against the Nazis. And he even wrote a letter with burning hearts, no, in German with Brennenden Sorge na nilagay sa mga tabernacles doon sa Germany. And they were read at the same time on a Sunday morning in all the masses against Nazism. So ganun ka-progressive si Pope doon. And then we could also say that since all the popes would simply relay the message of love, so si Pope Francis, he goes to the poor and to the abandoned, to the sick, which was exactly what Jesus also did. So kumbaga, we could also say that he's very traditional si Pope Francis. Kasi 2,000-year tradition, no? Yes, si Jesus mismo nagsimula, patuloy si Pope Francis. But of course, very progressive kasi iba nga yung situation ngayon if we compare with the past.
So it's really hard to
Well,
tell.
yung perception sa kanya, Father, mas loving tong Pope na to. Yun ang perception ng mga tao, is so inclusive, no, he's so compassionate.
More
Parang yung religion
progressive.
naging more merciful. Ang tingin
Okay.
ko, eto, mahal ako na itong Pope na to, mahal ako na simbahan. And I know a lot of lapsed Catholics return to the fold because of him
Yes, totoo po yan, no?
Matutuloy ba yun sa susunod, sa mga in the coming weeks? Matutuloy ba yung gano'n?
Ayan, no? I'm sure matutuloy, no? Kasi in the same way, for example, si Pope Francis, no? As I mentioned earlier, the same message of love, of joy, of peace, of justice, lahat yan, no? In the case of Pope Francis, he even went all the way, for example, sa ecology, sa nature, no? He expressed closeness with nature, even the name itself, Francis, Saint Francis of Assisi, brother sun, sister moon, nature na nature si Pope Francis. In the same way si Saint Francis of Assisi, ganun din. Well, nung time nila Pope John Paul, time nila Pope Benedict, maybe they had some other focuses, for example, sa doctrinal part. Mga scholars yon si Pope John Paul, mga writers yan, no? Si Pope Benedict, ang haba ng kanyang collected works, ilang volumes yun, thousands and thousands of pages, na hindi lang yung official as a Pope, but even as a theologian before becoming Pope, no? Ang dami niya talagang nasulat, but always the same goal, to bring Jesus's love to all. In the case of John Paul, in the case of Pope Benedict, maybe from a doctrinal perspective, promoting the human person, no? And even reaching out to the other religions, sila grabe din, no? Kumbaga, very progressive din yung kanilang taste. And I hope that after Pope Francis, patuloy, no? Patuloy lahat ito ng momentum created by Pope Francis and even of the prior popes.
Father Gaston,
I think we lost
Nag-mute.
we
audio.
lost his audio.
Nag-mute lang yung audio.
Regarding
there you go.
na talagang no? Hopefully,
Oo.
patuloy.
I mean, of course, every pope is going to come back to the Christ's teachings and will preach about love and mercy and kindness and goodness. Pero I think the reason also why Pope Francis was being seen as a more inclusive, more progressive, more liberal pope was because of some of the things that he said in the past. For instance, he was famous for saying that, homosexuality is not a crime, right? If somebody is homosexual but is seeking God, then who am I to judge him, right? And then he also embraced migrants. He spoke up on behalf of the plight of migrants around the world. Tapos, he's also famous for acknowledging the sexual abuses of the church. So I guess that's why, in general, he's being seen as the more progressive one amongst the line.
I would say totoo yan, no? But I would say that thanks also to the groundwork laid down by Pope John Paul. For example, yung sexual abuse during the time of Pope John Paul, talagang pinush niya rin nun. During the Jubilee year, di ba, he asked pardon, no, for the sins of the members of the church, si Pope John Paul. At doon nagsimula si Cardinal Ratzinger at the time na naging Pope Benedict. Siya yung talagang pinaaral ni Pope Francis regarding the sexual abuses. At nagkalabasan na at that time. At maganda, nung time naman ni Pope Francis ay talagang pinursige niya. And of all the institutions all over the world, I think ang Catholic Church ang nakapagplastada na kumbaga ng mga procedures, ng mga processes, lahat yan, no? At pinipursue talaga ng simbahan kasi nga out of service to all. Even Pope Francis, no, na ganito yung kanyang napagaganda kasi very progressive, very liberal. No? Although at the same time, he did not change anything sa teachings ng simbahan. No? So ganun pa rin, expressed in a different way. And even na talagang napakaganda ng impact sa mga tao.
Walter, maybe you could give some clarity there. Because like you said, wala naman siyang binago in terms of the teachings or the doctrine of the church. But at the same time, he also spoke very, very openly about embracing those who may not necessarily be following closely or hewing to the teachings of the church.
Yeah.
So could you give us a bit of clarity? Or maybe the word is nuancing. Ano yung tamang nuancing, for example, sa sinabi ng Papa pagdating sa things like divorce, for example. I remember there was a time na parang nagkakabanggaan yung Santo Papa with some American cardinals or bishops with regard to whether to give communion to divorcees because they are, in effect, at least as far as church teaching is concerned, committing adultery. So ano po yung tamang nuancing? How should we understand what the Pope said during that time?
And before you answer that, Father, I'm just going to call in the video. We now have the video of the Pope lying in the coffin. This is just broken.
Coming from Vatican.
Ito na. This is the wooden coffin that we've been talking about. That he's been placed in on his own wishes instead of the traditional na three interlinked coffins made of oaks, cypress, and lead and other materials. Pope Francis had requested one single simple wooden coffin made of wood and zinc. So we're seeing the first pictures out of the Vatican of the Pope lying in state in the coffin. And he also requested that he not be raised on the platform, on the
catafalque.
The catafalque, right? So he just wanted a very simple setup. Coming back to Father Greg, please go ahead.
Ayan, so thank you so much. Napakaganda. In the case of the teachings, well, maintaining the same teachings, but even his motto, which is choosing eligendo et misereando, being chosen and being given mercy. So ganun din tayong lahat, no? We are chosen by God and given mercy. That means those who are in technically or canonically, no, or legally sa simbahan are not in a correct situation, na sabi niya nga yung mga example na divorce and remarried, na mga technically same-sex unions, mga ganon. Maintaining the same teachings na that is not what it is supposed to be. Yung approach ni Pope Francis, napakaganda, and in a way talagang medyo bago nga, no? Kasi at least in the outward expression, ganun pa rin, no? All of us are chosen without any exception. All the people are chosen, not only Catholics, even the non-Catholics. We are all chosen by God, and God shows mercy on us. So lahat din tayo may kasalanan, lahat din tayo na may pagkakamali, but to all of us, God is merciful. Kaya nung opening ng Jubilee door, sabi niya, we can always come back to Him. We can always come back to Him. And Jubilee door, and that door, you don't even have to push it open. You don't even have to knock. Kasi bukas na bukas yung pintuan yun. So in whatever situation we are, yung maliliit o malalaki natin nagagawa every day, or in a continuous way, no, in a given situation na canonically, sa canon law ng simbahan, hindi dapat. Si Pope Francis, God is still merciful. But it doesn't mean, never sinabi ni Pope na, okay lang yan, manatili kayo dyan. Kumbaga, wait tayo, hintay tayo, be very patient. The church has to be very patient. We cannot condemn people. We should not condemn people. But we continue to pray and to facilitate. So for example, itong sa divorce and remarriage, si Pope Francis, talagang ginawa niyang mas madali, mas simple ngayon. Yung kung may grounds for nullity. Halimbawa, na-force pala yung marriage, halimbawa, wala naman palang marriage in the first place. Kaya napadali yung investigations, napadali yung process na kung may grounds pala, then maghiwalay sila. Kung wala talagang grounds, then hindi pa rin. So kumaga, more mercy in the sense na more patience, although nandun pa rin yung end goal natin.
So the Pope basically was not, Father, tell me if I'm getting this right, the Pope was basically not changing the interpretation of whether something is right or wrong depending on the church doctrine, but it was more like he was choosing to keep the door wide open instead of threatening to shut the door.
Exactly, no? And he was in a way, baka hindi naman directly sinabi, kundi he was implying na it is wrong to simply condemn people. Kasi ganun si Teo, we cannot condemn them. No, we have to pray for changes, and it has happened so many times, no? Na after some time, naayos naman pala yung situation, then okay, no? Maganda.
Pero yun nga ang tanong ngayon, Father. Now that he has passed away, marorol ba kaya yung mga reforms niya? Halimbawa, yung remarried and divorced people, can they continue receiving communion? Yung same-sex couples, can they continue receiving blessings from the church? Yung ganyang mga tanong ngayon ng and kaya binabantayan mabuti kung yung succession, kung sino yung mananalo. Because we understand malakas din ang pushback ng traditionalists in the church. Marami din siyang critics within the church, no? So tatanong nga ang mga tao ngayon, ano kaya, saan ba papunta yung hangin ngayon sa Catholic Church?
Oo, napakagandang observation, Ami. So, ayun, no? Kasi yung teachings kasi ng simbahan talagang hindi mapapalitan. Maybe yung approach.
Yes, hindi mapapalitan siya.
Oo, yung same-sex couples, yung binibless doon, yung person, halimbawa may dumating sa akin na same-sex couple, okay, I can bless you as persons individually or maybe with many other people, i-bless ko kayo. Although yung hindi ko pwedeng gawin, at yan din ang talaga, no? Yung nuance na tinatawag natin, yung hindi ko pwedeng gawin ay i-bless ko silang dalawa as a couple. And then sabihin ko, okay, maganda yung pagsasama niyo. Hindi naman pwede. Although yung i-bless ko lahat ng tao, kahit sino, even non-Catholics, pwede ko i-bless. No? Even objects, di ba? Mga rosary, pwede naman natin i-bless. So anyone, we can bless anyone. Although, pag halimbawa may lumapit sa akin na may gagawin akong masama, i-bless mo ako, hindi ko naman pwedeng gawin yan. So kumbaga, may nuance pa rin. No? And then, hopefully, probably, I'm sure in the same way na si Pope Francis, he built on the momentum of Pope John Paul II, of the Second Vatican Council, actually, noong time ni Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul VI, Pope John Paul I, na 1 month lang siya, and John Paul II, Pope Benedict, kung baga pa-momentum, and most probably, surely, yung next Pope will also build on the momentum of Pope Francis and all the other popes.
And the other side of it kasi is each leadership change is a reflection of the times that we're living in, right? So, for instance, the Philippines still is a predominantly Catholic country, and if I recall correctly, it is still growing. The membership, can we call it membership? The
faithful.
The faithful. The percentage.
Sounds like a library card.
Kaya, the percentage of the faithful in Asia is still growing, pero in other parts of the world, it's fast shrinking. So, for example, in the U.S., only 19% now identify as Catholic. So, parang there's also that tension of whether, I remember when Pope Francis was elected, there was a big push to grow the faithful in other parts of the world that had traditionally been overlooked. So now the question is also, okay, in Europe, in the US, in the more advanced economies, parang medyo Catholicism is losing ground a bit. Do they then focus on that, right? As opposed to Asia, Africa, where Catholicism still has a deep roots.
Ayan po, magandang din observation. No? Marami kasing mga countries, for example, dito sa Europe, no, yung mga seminarians, kumukonti. So problema nila, anong gagawin sa mga building, sa mga seminary, sa mga library. Although pag pumunta ka naman sa Africa, problema nila, saan ipapatulugin yung seminarians kasi napakarami. So, yun naman ang problema nila doon. So, and then may mga little arrangements with the dioceses dito sa Italy, for example, to welcome yung mga galing sa Africa. Dito magti-training as seminarians, and then pag naging pare, dito din mag-serve ng konti, although they still belong to their diocese in Africa and they can go back anytime. But, kumbaga, because of technology, and ito na-push din ni Pope Francis, no, na napakadali na ng communication, napakadali na ng travel. Kaya in a way, changing, as you said, no? Changing talaga yung face ng simbahan. Meanwhile, marami ding mga good signs. For example, just last 2 weeks ago, nag-meeting kami, mga rectors, and the one from the English College was telling us na may pinadala nga sa amin na yung link na doon sa England, ayan, dumadami yung Catholics, dumadami yung baptisms, dumadami din yung mga pari, no? So may even sa US, for example, 75% ng mga nagpapari ngayon are young professionals. So may mga parts din na medyo dumadami. So patuloy lang tayo sa ating pagdasal.
Okay.
Father, sa Pilipinas, kumusta yung church? Is it growing? Is it static? Is it shrinking?
I think sa Philippines, we are maintaining, kasi sa ibang diocese, we get about 8 priests, 10 new priests every year. Sa iba naman, 2, 3, 5, no? So depende naman sa area. And then, yung isang consideration din is yung mga lay organizations. Kasi a lot na ginagawa dati ng mga pari, ng mga madre, pwede naman yung mga lay people, even reaching out to the poor, mga services, gano'n, no? Mas magaling pa nga kayo dyan, no? Pwede kaya magturo ng algebra. Dati, padre, madre, nagtuturo ng mathematics. Pwede naman talaga lay yan, so that the priest, we can focus sa sacraments, confession, studying. Yan din ginagawa namin dito sa Collegio Filippino, is to ay tahanan. Residents ng ating kaparian, pinapadala for further training, including further studies. Before we became priests, we had to take up a bachelor in philosophy, 4 years, theology masters, another 4 years, and then 1 year na exposure, parish, so 9 years after ng high school. In my case, I was in second year medicine, kaya 5 years na tapos kong philosophy and theology. And then, dito yung pinapadala, another round of master's, licentiate, doctorate, at least 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. So, palalim. Dito naman sa Collegio Filipino, actually, tumataas yung population natin. No, from 30 plus, naging 40 plus, ngayon ay 56 tayo na mga pari dito. So hopefully, madadagdagan pa yung mga pari natin dito para pag-uwi, kami naman magtuturo sa mga seminarian, sa mga future na mga pari.
Okay. We'll leave that there for now. Thank you so much for your time and your patience, especially since nakatayo po kayo the whole time. Thank you so much, Father Gregory Gaston, Rector of the Pontificio Collegio Filippino in Rome.
Thank you, Father.
Maraming
Thank you,
salamat.
Father.
Thank you, Father.